The great halls of the celestial empire shone with light from 1,000 crystals. Every beam danced across the polished floors, reflecting the pride and power of a people who had ruled for centuries. The Empress sat upon her throne, her beauty unmatched, her presence enough to still the hearts of anyone who dared to meet her gaze. Yet for all her grace, she had never chosen a consort, and thousands had tried to win her hand in vain. From across the galaxy, princes, warlords, and heroes had come bearing gifts beyond imagination. They brought fleets, jewels from dying stars, and treasures stolen from worlds no longer alive. Some challenged her champions in duels. Others wrote poems that could move empires. Yet every one of them failed. The Empress dismissed them without hesitation, her heart untouched, her eyes always searching for something none of them could give. Then came the war. It began without warning. A rival empire, fierce and cunning, struck the celestial empire's border worlds with merciless speed. The royal council believed their forces would hold, but the enemy was unlike any they had faced before. Planets fell in days. Cities burned. The people whispered that the celestial empire might lose for the first time in history. The Empress did not hide in her palace. She rode to the front lines with her generals, her silver banners shining in the smoke-filled skies. Yet even there, victory seemed far away. The enemy's commanders were ruthless, their machines unstoppable. Every attempt to push them back ended in more loss. Desperation began to creep into the hearts of the Empress's people. It was during this chaos that the human arrived. He came not with an army, nor with grand titles or wealth. His ship was small, scarred from battles long past, and his uniform bore no royal crest. Many mocked his presence, asking what a lone human could do when 10,000 of the galaxy's finest had failed even to impress the Empress in peace. But the human did not speak of winning her heart. He came for something else entirely. He stepped into the war council as soldiers and ministers argued over maps filled with red enemy marks. The Empress's eyes caught him immediately. His face carried no fear, no arrogance, only calm focus. He studied the battlefield as if the chaos around him was nothing more than a puzzle waiting to be solved. The generals laughed when he suggested a counterattack they had not considered. They stopped laughing when his plan saved 3 cities in a single day. From that moment, the human was given command of a small but skilled force. He moved them like a shadow through enemy lines, striking where no one expected. Each victory was small on its own, but together they began to turn the tide. The Empress watched these reports with growing interest. She did not care for warriors who fought only for glory, but she saw in him something different. He fought for the people, not for her approval, and that made her curious. One night, after a decisive strike that saved a refugee convoy, the Empress summoned him to her private chambers. It was the first time they spoke alone. She asked him why he had come, why he risked his life for a war that was not his own. His answer was simple, almost careless, yet it stayed with her long after he left. He said he could not stand by while innocents suffered, no matter the world they came from. The Empress had heard countless words of love, loyalty, and flattery. Yet none had touched her like those quiet, honest words from a man who did not seek her favor. In that moment, she realized he was different from every suitor before him. And though the war still raged, she felt a change within herself, a spark she had never known before. The war raged on, but the balance had shifted. The human strategies were not like those of the Empire's generals. He did not rely on overwhelming force or showy victories. Instead, he used speed, precision, and surprise. He struck at supply lines, freed captured outposts, and moved before the enemy could react. Every success lifted the morale of the Celestial Empire's soldiers and made the Empress watch more closely. Her council began to argue about him. Some saw him as a gift from the stars, a warrior sent by fate. Others feared him, believing no outsider should wield such influence. Yet the Empress silenced their quarrels. She trusted her own judgment more than the voices around her. What mattered was that her people had hope again, and it had come because of him. The human never asked for rewards. He refused offers of land, titles, and even gold. Instead, he demanded better weapons for the soldiers, more food for the refugees, and medicine for the wounded. His selflessness puzzled the court. In a galaxy where power and wealth drove most actions, a man who fought only for others was a rare thing. It made the Empress wonder if he even understood how unique he was. One evening, after a long day of planning, the Empress visited the military encampment without ceremony. She found the humans sitting with soldiers around a small fire, sharing a simple meal. There were no guards, no servants, no barriers. He laughed with them, listened to their worries, and offered advice as if he were one of them. She stood in the shadows for a long time before stepping forward to join them. The soldiers rose instantly at the sight of her, but she gestured for them to sit. The human looked at her with the same calm eyes as before, unshaken by her presence. They spoke briefly, not as ruler and subject, but as equals. She found herself enjoying the quiet conversation more than any grand banquet or formal meeting she had endured in her life. Over the next weeks, the two began to meet often. Sometimes in the war room over maps and reports. Sometimes on the battlefield, where their forces fought side by side. And sometimes in the stillness of night, where words carried deeper meaning. Yet never did he flatter her or speak of her beauty. He treated her with respect, but without the fear or desire she had seen in every other man who came before. It was this that made her thoughts restless. The Empress had been courted by the most powerful beings in the galaxy, each trying to claim her hand. None had succeeded. Yet here was a human, a man with no title and no desire for her throne, and he was the first to stir something in her heart. She did not understand it fully, but she could not deny it. The enemy began to notice his impact as well. Ambushes were laid, traps were set. More than once, the human's unit was surrounded, but each time they fought their way free. His reputation spread beyond the Empire's borders, and some enemy soldiers began to whisper his name with fear. The Empress knew this made him a target, yet she also knew they could not win without him. One night, word came that his small force had gone missing during a deep strike mission. Scouts reported no signs of them. The War Council prepared for the worst, but the Empress refused to believe he had fallen. She ordered every available scout to search the region. For the first time in many years, her calm broke, and her voice carried urgency that could not be mistaken. When he finally returned 3 days later, battered but alive, the Empress went to meet him herself. She did not wait for the court, the council, or the ceremony. She walked down the palace steps and stood before him in the open courtyard. In that moment, she realized she had been afraid, not as a ruler fearing the loss of a valuable commander, but as a woman fearing the loss of someone she could not bear to lose. The days after his return were filled with quiet tension. The Empress had not spoken openly about her worry, but those who knew her well could see the change. She visited the barracks more often, sometimes under the excuse of checking supplies or inspecting troops. Yet her gaze always searched for one face among the soldiers, and it always softened when she found him. The human noticed her presence, but never let it distract him from his duties. He continued leading missions, training new recruits, and improving the army's tactics. When she spoke to him, his answers were straightforward, without unnecessary flattery. He treated her as an equal in strategy and as a friend in conversation. This balance was something she had never known, and it drew her toward him more with each passing day. One evening, a messenger arrived with troubling news. The enemy had built a massive fortress in the mountains, heavily defended and impossible to approach directly. It threatened to cut off the Empire's main supply route. The generals argued over how to deal with it, but the humans simply studied the map in silence. Then he traced a line across the mountains that no one had considered before. He proposed a dangerous route through a hidden pass known only to a few traders. It would allow their forces to strike the fortress from behind, but it would mean traveling through harsh, frozen terrain. The generals doubted it could be done without heavy losses. The Empress, however, listened carefully, her eyes fixed on his calm expression. She asked him if he believed it was possible, and he answered with a firm yes. The mission was approved, and the human led the operation himself. The journey was brutal. Snowstorms blinded the soldiers, and icy cliffs threatened to claim lives. With a single misstep, yet his leadership kept them moving. He carried supplies for those who faltered, gave up his rations for the weakest, and kept morale high even when hope seemed thin. By the time they reached the other side, the men followed him with unshakable loyalty. The attack came at dawn. The fortress defenders never expected an assault from the mountains. Within hours the stronghold fell, and the supply route was secured. The Empress received the news while addressing the council, and for the first time in many years, a genuine smile crossed her face. She dismissed the meeting and went to greet him as he returned, her heart lighter than it had been in months. When she saw him step through the gates, covered in frost and dirt, yet standing tall, she felt a rush of pride. Not just as a ruler who had gained a great victory, but as a woman who saw in him something more than courage. She thanked him in front of the soldiers, but her eyes held a private message meant only for him. He gave a small nod, understanding her without the need for words. That night, the palace held a celebration in honor of the victory. Music filled the halls, and the air shimmered with the glow of crystal lights. The Empress wore a gown of silver and white, her presence commanding as always. Yet her attention was not on the nobles who sought her favor. It was on the human, who stood at the edge of the hall, clearly more comfortable in the field than in a royal gathering. She approached him without warning, drawing the gaze of everyone present. A murmur swept through the crowd as she offered him a seat beside her. It was a gesture that spoke volumes in a court where every movement carried meaning. He accepted without hesitation, though his expression remained steady. The two spoke quietly, sharing thoughts on the war and on the people they served. By the end of the night, the Empress knew one thing with certainty. The man who had never tried to win her heart was closer to it than anyone had ever been. He had not come with promises of love or power. He had come with action, loyalty, and an unshakable will to protect. And without meaning to, he had become the one she could not imagine losing. The war was entering its most dangerous stage. The enemy, humiliated by their recent losses, began to gather all their strength for one final assault. Scouts reported massive fleets moving toward the heart of the Celestial Empire. The air in the War Council grew heavy with fear, and even the most experienced generals struggled to agree on a strategy. The Empress called for the human, knowing his mind could cut through the noise. He entered the chamber quietly, his eyes scanning the maps and reports without distraction. When asked for his opinion, he spoke simply. They could not win by matching the enemy's numbers. They had to strike first, at a place where the enemy would not expect them. His words brought the room to silence. He proposed targeting the enemy's command base, hidden deep within a region of shifting storms. No fleet had ever crossed it without being destroyed by the violent winds and lightning. Yet he believed a small, fast force could slip through and cripple their leadership. Without their command, the enemy's massive army would fall into chaos. The plan was risky, but the Empress trusted his judgment. Preparations began at once. The human handpicked the soldiers who would accompany him. Many of them were veterans who had fought beside him before, willing to follow him into any danger. The Empress gave him her personal crest as a symbol of her faith, a gesture that made the entire court take notice. Some whispered that she was giving him more than just military authority. The journey through the storms was worse than anyone imagined. Thunder shook the ships and lightning tore across the skies. At times it seemed the very air was trying to tear them apart. Yet the human's calm voice over the comms kept everyone focused. He gave clear orders, adjusted their course with precision, and never allowed fear to take hold. The men drew strength from his resolve. When they reached the enemy base, they struck without hesitation. Explosions lit the night as they tore through defenses that had never been breached. The enemy commanders scrambled to respond, but the attack was too sudden and too precise. Within hours, the base was in ruins and the command network was shattered. The human ordered a swift retreat before reinforcements could arrive. By the time they returned to the capital, reports were already flooding in. The enemy fleets were in disarray. Some units withdrew, others turned on each other in confusion. The Empress listened to the news with quiet satisfaction, knowing this might be the moment that turned the entire war. When the human entered the throne room, she stood to greet him, ignoring the gasps from her court. She thanked him not just for the victory, but for the lives his actions had saved. Her words were formal, but her gaze was not. There was warmth. There, a connection that had grown far beyond duty. The court watched closely, sensing that history was being written in that moment. The human bowed, but his eyes met hers with the same steady strength she had come to admire. That evening, she invited him to walk with her in the palace gardens. The night was clear, the stars bright above them. They spoke not of war, but of their worlds, their people, and the lives they had before the conflict began. For the first time, the Empress laughed freely, her voice carrying through the still air. It was a sound the human seemed to treasure. As they parted that night, the Empress realized something she had been avoiding. The man who had never sought her hand, who had come to fight for her people without asking for reward, had become the one she trusted most. The war was not yet over, but in her heart, she knew that whatever happened, she would not face it without him. The victory in the storm region had shaken the enemy, but it had not ended the war. They began to pull their forces back, gathering for what would be a desperate counterattack. The Empress knew they were most dangerous when cornered. She ordered the defenses of the capital to be strengthened. While the human began preparing for whatever move the enemy would make next, rumors spread quickly among the people. Some said the human was more than a soldier, that he was the reason the Empress still fought with such resolve. Others claimed he was destined to become her consort. The Empress ignored the gossip, but she could not deny that she felt his presence, even when he was not near. It was an unfamiliar weight in her heart, but not an unwelcome one. The human spent his days moving between the front lines in the palace. He trained soldiers in new tactics, inspected the defenses, and ensured supplies reached the areas most in need. He never lingered on ceremony or praise. For him, the work came first. This quiet dedication impressed even his critics, though they would not admit it openly. One afternoon, a messenger arrived with grim news. The enemy had struck a border world, not for conquest, but to draw the human out. They had taken hostages, demanding that he face them in open battle. The council argued over what to do, fearing it was a trap. The Empress listened to their voices but kept her eyes on him, waiting for his answer. He did not hesitate. If the enemy wanted him, they would have to face him on his terms. He proposed a plan to rescue the hostages without giving the enemy the battle they desired. It was a dangerous mission, requiring stealth, speed, and absolute precision. The Empress gave her approval, though she felt a deep unease she could not hide. The mission began under the cover of darkness. The human led a small team through the dense forests that surrounded the enemy camp. They moved silently, avoiding patrols and cutting down guards before alarms could be raised. Every step brought them closer to the prisoners. The soldiers followed his lead without question, trusting his judgment as they always had. When they reached the cages, the hostages looked up in disbelief. They had heard the enemy boast that no one would dare attempt a rescue. Yet here stood the human, unlocking their chains and guiding them to safety. The retreat was fast and silent, but not without danger. Enemy scouts spotted them near the edge of the forest, and a brief fight broke out before they could escape. By dawn they were back within the safety of the Empire's borders. The hostages were reunited with their families, and the news spread like wildfire. The people celebrated, not just because lives had been saved, but because the human had once again proven that no trap could hold him. The Empress heard the cheers from the palace walls and allowed herself a quiet moment of pride. Later that day, she summoned him to her private chamber. She thanked him for the lives he had saved, but also asked why he took such risks when others might have hesitated. His answer was as steady as always. He said that if he had the power to help, then he had the duty to act. It was not a matter of choice, but of who he was. Her gaze lingered on him for a long moment after he spoke. In that silence, she understood that his strength came not from ambition, but from conviction. And she realized that if the final battle was to come, she wanted him by her side, not just as a commander, but as someone she could trust with more than her throne. She wanted him as the one person she could trust with her life. The days that followed the rescue were restless. The enemy's movements grew more erratic, their raids more frequent. Scouts reported that their remaining forces were gathering in one location. It was a sign that they intended to strike with everything they had left. The Empress called for an emergency meeting with her council, and the human was the first to arrive. The council was divided. Some wanted to wait and strengthen the defenses of the capital. Others argued for a preemptive strike to crush the enemy before they could attack. The human listened without speaking. When the room fell silent, he stepped forward and pointed to a location on the map. It was an abandoned mining colony, positioned perfectly between the enemy's forces and the capital. He said it was there they should make their stand. The plan was simple but dangerous. If they moved quickly, they could fortify the colony and force the enemy into a narrow battlefield where their numbers would mean less. The Empress agreed. She knew it was a risk, but she also knew that waiting would give the enemy the advantage. Preparations began immediately, and the human took personal command of the defenses. When the Empire's forces arrived at the colony, the human wasted no time. Trenches were dug, barricades built, and artillery placed in strategic positions. Soldiers moved with urgency, knowing the enemy could arrive at any moment. The Empress herself walked among them, speaking words of encouragement. Her presence inspired the troops, but it was the humans' calm authority that kept them steady. The attack began at sunrise 2 days later. The enemy came in waves, their war cries echoing across the battlefield. The Empire's soldiers held their ground, firing in disciplined volleys. The human moved from position to position, reinforcing weak points and rallying those in danger of breaking. He fought alongside them, never asking them to face a danger he would not face himself. At one point, an enemy assault broke through the outer defenses. The human led a counterattack, driving them back with fierce determination. The fighting was brutal, but his presence at the front gave the soldiers the strength to push harder. When the line was restored, the Empress herself rode out to see the battlefield. Her eyes met his across the smoke and chaos, and a silent understanding passed between them. Hours turned into a full day of fighting. The enemy threw everything they had into the assault, but the Empire's forces refused to break. Every time the enemy pushed forward, they were driven back. The human strategy worked exactly as planned, and by nightfall, the ground before the colony was littered with abandoned weapons and broken banners. The enemy's will was beginning to falter. That night, under the cover of darkness, the human led a small strike force deep into enemy territory. Their target was the enemy's command tent. If they could take it out, the battle would end. Moving silently through the shadows, they reached the camp without raising an alarm. The attack was swift and decisive. By the time the enemy realized what had happened, Their leaders were gone, and their army was in chaos. The next morning, the enemy's remaining forces surrendered. The war was over. The empire had survived, and its people were free once more. The soldiers cheered, the banners of victory were raised, and the Empress stood before her army to address them. But her eyes searched for one face among the crowd. And when she found him, her voice softened almost imperceptibly. She declared him the savior of the empire. The court and the soldiers roared their approval, but the human remained humble. He bowed to her, not as a ruler to a subject, but as one equal to another. In that moment, the Empress realized that the bond between them was no longer something the court could ignore. It was something she herself could no longer deny. The capital celebrated for days after the war ended. Streets were filled with banners, music, and the voices of people who had feared they might never see peace again. Markets overflowed with goods, children played freely, and the air was alive with hope. Yet inside the palace, not everyone felt the same joy. The Empress's open praise for the human during her victory speech had stirred the court. Some ministers whispered that it was improper for a ruler to give such attention to an outsider. Others feared he held too much influence over her decisions. They met in secret, speaking in cautious tones about ways to separate him from the throne. The Empress knew of their words but gave them no weight. The human, for his part, remained unchanged. He continued to assist in rebuilding damaged cities, training soldiers, and ensuring supplies reached those who needed them most. He refused titles and wealth once again, which only confused those who could not understand a man who did not hunger for power. To the Empress, it made him stand out even more. One evening, she invited him to the highest balcony of the palace. From there, the lights of the city stretched far into the night, a sea of life and movement. She told him that this was why she fought, why she endured the burden of leadership. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he simply said that it was worth fighting for. Those words stayed with her long after he left, but the court's pressure did not fade. The High Chancellor approached her one morning, warning that her closeness to the human could be seen as a weakness by rival states. The Empress replied that the man had saved their empire more than once, and that anyone who mistook her gratitude for weakness would regret it. Her voice carried such weight that the Chancellor bowed and withdrew without another word. Still, she could feel the tension building. Rumors began to spread beyond the palace walls. Some claimed the human had already been promised her hand. Others said he commanded her armies in secret. These tales were false, but she knew they could not be ignored forever. The human seemed aware of them too, but he never brought the subject up, focusing instead on the work at hand. When a small border dispute flared between two allied worlds, the Empress sent the human to mediate. He returned with the matter resolved, peacefully, earning praise from leaders who had once doubted him. This only deepened the admiration of the people, who now spoke his name with the same respect they gave to their Empress. For the first time in her reign, she felt the weight of public opinion aligning with her own heart. One night, during a quiet dinner in her private chambers, she asked him if he ever considered leaving the empire now that the war was over. He looked at her with steady eyes and said that he would go where he was needed. Then, after a pause, he added that at the moment, he believed he was needed here. The warmth in her chest at those words was unlike anything she had felt before. The following day, she summoned the council. Before them all, she declared that the human would be given the title of Protector of the Empire, a position that answered only to her. The ministers exchanged glances, but none dared to object openly. She knew some would still resist in private. But this move ensured that no one could remove him without her consent. As the meeting ended, she caught his eye across the chamber. There was no smile on his face, only the quiet acknowledgement of a man who understood the responsibility that came with such a role. In that moment, the Empress realized that her next decision would not only change her life but the future of the empire itself. And she knew that choice would be made soon. Asterisk. The days after his appointment as protector of the empire were filled with quiet changes. The court could no longer openly challenge his presence, yet whispers still followed him. In the halls, the Empress ignored them. She had made her choice, and she would not let politics undo what she knew was right. Still, she could feel that a final decision between them could not be delayed forever. One evening, she called for a gathering in the Grand Hall. Leaders from across the empire and beyond were invited. The event was announced as a celebration of peace, but the Empress knew it would be the moment she revealed her true intentions. The human stood at her side in his formal attire, unaware of the words she planned to speak before the night ended. The hall glittered with golden light, music filling the air as guests exchanged polite greetings. Yet beneath the surface, the tension was heavy. Some suspected that the Empress would use this moment to name a consort. Others believed she would announce a new alliance. Only she knew the truth, and she carried it with calm certainty. When the music faded and the hall grew silent, she stepped forward. Her voice carried across the chamber, clear and strong. She spoke of the war, of the sacrifices made, and of the courage that had saved the empire when all hope seemed lost. She spoke of a man who had never asked for power, yet had become the strongest shield of her people. She turned toward him then, her eyes meeting his. The room held its breath. In front of all, she declared that she would not allow tradition or fear to decide her heart. She named him not only protector of the empire, but also her chosen consort. Gasps filled the hall, and a wave of shock rippled through the court. The human stood still, his eyes fixed on hers. The silence was broken by the voices of the people in the balconies above, shouting their approval. Many of the nobles remained frozen, unsure whether to applaud or object, but the Empress's authority was absolute. With one gesture, she made it clear that this was not a matter for debate. The human bowed to her, not out of formality, but with genuine respect. After the ceremony, they walked together through the palace gardens. The night was quiet, and the stars seemed brighter than ever. She told him that she had no desire for a union born of politics. What she wanted was a partner she could trust in both peace and war. He listened, then answered that he had stood with her in battle and would do the same in all things to come. Word of their union spread quickly across the empire and beyond. Some rival rulers saw it as a sign of strength, others as an unexpected vulnerability, but the people celebrated without hesitation. To them, it was the ending they had hoped for, the joining of two figures who had carried them through the darkest days of their history. In the weeks that followed, the human took his place beside the Empress in matters of governance. He remained the same in spirit, refusing excess and speaking plainly, even in the council chamber. The Empress valued his honesty, even when it clashed with the careful language of her ministers. Together, they began shaping a future that would honor both their peoples, and so the empire entered a new era. It was not built on fear or conquest, but on trust and shared purpose. The Empress had found the one who had succeeded where 10,000 had failed, not by trying to win her, but by standing beside her when it mattered most. In that truth, she found both her peace and her strength.